Alright, sixth graders, so in this video what we're going to be looking at is, now that we kind of have an idea of how the benchmarks work, so 0, a half, or 1, we're going to start to look at how we can use that information to actually start to put our fractions in order from least to greatest or greatest to least, and vice versa from there. So for example, one thing you can do, like I said before, is you can totally just draw pictures, right? So you can sit there and use that app, and I was hoping that this would actually let me pull it up so you could see, and you can actually drag the bars around. But say for example, maybe we were just looking at 1/5, 6/10, and 21/23. Okay, so we could actually draw out those pictures, right? So you could sit there and I could draw 3 equal sized bars, and I would suggest using a bar for these instead of a circle, just because I think that the bars are easy to compare piece to piece. And you can just split those up. So there's our fifths. There's our tenths. So if we have 1/5, there's 6/10. And now if I'm doing 23rds, okay, not quite equal. And this is one of those problems of we're like actually trying to draw it out. But if I were to color in 21, I know that there's just 2 pieces missing. And so then, like I said, you could potentially look at just being able to move those pieces around for how you want to look at it until you had them in the order that you want. But here we can see that our 1/5 would be smaller, and then our 6/10, and then our 21/23. So like I've said before, you can totally draw out pictures or use that app, but in the sense of being efficient, not necessarily always the most efficient way to do it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to look now, instead of drawing out our pictures, is using those benchmarks to help us arrange. So I'm going to create a number line. What I'm going to do on that number line is I'm just going to use 0, 1/2, and 1. And I'm just going to give us a group of fractions. So say we had 1/18, maybe we had 1/3, 6/10, 11/22, and then say 17/19. The first thing I would suggest is just figure out which benchmark each of these is closest to. So is it closest to having 0, 1/2, or 1 for each of these? So 1/18. Now, one thing you can also do is you can start to look at, are any of the denominators the same, which is that bottom number, or are any of the numerators the same? So like right here, for example, both of these numerators are 1. Since both the numerators are the same, we can look at the denominators. Remember, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. So if I only have 1 out of 18 pieces of pie compared to 1 out of 3, I'm getting a much smaller 1 piece. Now 1 is also pretty far away from 18. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to put the 1/18 down here. Now thirds are tricky because a lot of times we make the assumption that because it's 1 out of 3 that it's closer to 0. But if you actually take your circle and draw into thirds, when I color in that 1/3, I can see that I'm actually pretty close to a half, but it's less than a half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1/3 up by a half, but I'm going to put it before the halfway point because I know that it's less than a half. So 6/10. If I look at that idea of 10 divided by 2 is 5. 6 is a little bit more than 5, so it's still close to that halfway, but it's going to be more than half. So I'm going to put that to the right of 1/2. 11 out of 22. Now if you didn't know this, I could do 22 divided by 2 and I get 11. Well, those two numbers match, which means 11 out of 22 is exactly 1/2. So I'm going to put that right below 1/2. And now when I look at 17/19, I'm missing 2 pieces, but 17 is still closer to 19 than it's going to be to any of the other numbers. So now I'm going to put 17/19 over here. So now, even though we were just looking at benchmarks, because I had the idea of looking at is it less than a half, more than a half, etc., I don't actually have anything I need to move around at this point, and my fractions are already in order from least to greatest. So 1/18 would be our smallest, then 1/3, then 11 over 22, 6/10, and 7/19. Now, what if you did not have as easy of fractions to work with? So what if we had 44 out of 80, 33 out of 34, 7/8, and let's say 3 out of 20. So I'm just going to start with that number line again. So here's my 0, here's my half, here's my whole. Now, I know that half of 80 is 40. 44 is more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 44/80ths to the right of my line. 33 is only 1 away from 34. So I know that's pretty close to having 1. So I'm going to put 33 over 44 by my 1. Now here, 7/8 is also really close to 1 because it's also just 1 piece away. So I'm just going to put 7/8 over here. Not that I'm putting it that it's bigger than 1. I know it's not bigger than 1 because my top number is smaller than my bottom. But just because right now, I might not know which out of 33 44ths and 7/8 is the greater one. So I'm just going to set it to the side to think of later. And then I have 3 20ths. So since 3 is so far away from 20, I know that's going to be close to 0. So at this point, I know that 3 20ths is going to be my smallest. And then 44/80ths is going to be my second because it's the only one that's close to a half. So now I'm just looking at 33 over 44 and 7/8 and deciding which one's bigger. If you remember, oh, not 30, so 33 over 34, not 44. That would make a difference. One thing we can look at is how far the numerator is away from the denominator. So the difference between 33 and 34 is 1. The difference between 7/8 is 1. So each of them is missing 1 piece from their whole. Because, like we said before, 34ths are much smaller pieces than 8ths. That means that missing piece is going to be a much smaller piece than the 7/8. So 33 34ths is actually going to be our biggest, and 7/8 is going to be the next one. So if I was going to number these, 3 20ths would be first, then 44/80ths, then 7/8, and then 33 34ths. So just some ideas of things that you can look at. Like I said, you can still use the fraction bars on the app and drag your fractions around until you have them in order. But if we're working towards efficiency, we don't always want to have to draw out our fractions to look at.